Good afternoon and welcome to today's Dorset Young Planners webinar on design review panels. My name is Philip Saunders and I'm joined today by my co-host Millie and our speaker Jonathan Braddick. We're very grateful for Jonathan's time today, and Jonathan is the founder of the Design Review Panel, which operates nationally across England. He is also chair of the South West Design Review Panel. He's prepared a really interesting presentation for us today, which begins by looking at how design review panels have evolved over time. He then has some great examples to run through, illustrating how design review panels now work in practice today, providing impartial, expert advice to both planning applicants and local planning authorities. And I'll hand you over to my co-host Millie, who'll introduce herself and run through some housekeeping points before we crack on. Over to you, Millie.
Thank you, Philip, and hello everyone. My name's Millie and I'm a Planning Policy Officer at Dorset Council. And Philip and I are members of the Dorset Young Planners and are delighted to bring you this virtual CPD event today. So as mentioned, I'm just going to run through a few housekeeping points to help you to get the most out of your session. So as delegates, you've all been muted. If you've got a question for the organiser or speaker, then please send your question via the box in the GoToWebinar panel, which might be either on the right or at the top of your screen. Jonathan, our speaker's presentation will run for approximately 35 to 40 minutes before we come to the Q&A session. Any questions that we don't have time to answer today will be considered by Jonathan after the session and answers emailed to all participants. A copy of the presentation will be included as a handout for you to download from the webinar panel towards the end of the session. If you personally lose connection, please just try rejoining via the link that was emailed to you from GoToWebinar, and you might just want to ensure that you disconnect other devices from the Wi-Fi to make sure it's at optimum levels. And if the speakers lose connectivity, which hopefully won't happen today, just please wait in the webinar and keep an eye on your emails in case we have to relaunch the session with a new link. So I'd now like to hand over to Jonathan Braddick, who will introduce himself and his work and then be giving his presentation. Over to you, Jonathan.
Great, thank you, Millie. Thank you, Philip. Thanks for asking me to come along today and speak to you about design review panels. As Philip said, I'm going to talk about the origins of design review panels and also the background to our design review panel, how it operates, and then also provide a number of examples of how and where our design review panel has been used and how it's helped both local authorities and design teams as well. And then we're going to have some questions. So very briefly, a tiny bit about me. I'm Jonathan Braddick. I'm a chartered architect and I founded this particular design review panel at the end of 2013. Previously, started my career, I was a project manager, and then I've also worked for architects practices in the southeast and southwest of England on a wide variety of project types, from residential, commercial, and quite a lot of conservation work as well. I also do some tutoring, and I'm a part of the examiner at the Welsh School of Architecture, and I'm a past Southwest Regional Chair of the Royal Institute of British Architects. So the history of design review, the point of including this in here really is to demonstrate that design review has been around for a very long time, and the benefits of it have been recognised for a long time as well. Originally, the Royal Fine Art Commission was founded in 1924, and it primarily initially only looked at kind of projects that were referred to by government, and then its role was extended a bit later in 1933. It played a big role then after World War II in regards to post-war planning and reconstruction, and again, its scope of its remit was widened again at that stage as well. In 1999, its function was taken over by the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, as we know, CABE. And so we can see that, really for quite a long time, the value of good design and a link to economics and vibrancy has been recognised for a very long time. So it's nothing new. Alongside that, the Council for Industrial Design was created in 1944 by the President of the Board of Trade. And that was to promote by all practical means the improvement of design in the products of British industry. And again, we can see a link here between the recognition of good design and economic vibrancy and health of the country. So the Royal Fine Art Commission becomes CABE, and then the Council of Industrial Design becomes the Design Council in 1972. And then more recently, we then know that, of course, those two organisations also merged in 2011. And the credit is to bring together two world-class centres for design excellence to speak with one voice and support a broad spectrum of design, architecture and public space, and place it at the heart of social and economic renewal. So again, just showing, bringing that kind of message and recognition of the role of good design right up to date. And then we have the National Planning Policy Framework, which is how that then brings it to the current time and puts it into a planning context. And of course, as we all know, I'm sorry to teach you to suck eggs, but the NPPF says that design quality should be considered throughout the evolution and assessment of individual proposals. An early discussion between applicants, the local planning authority, and local community about design and style of emerging schemes is important for clarifying expectations and reconciling local and commercial interests. So of course, the NPPF places design right at its heart. It's that thread running through planning. And then the NPPF also requires that local authorities have and make use of various tools, including design advice and review arrangements, and that in assessing applications, local planning authorities should have a regard to the outcome from these processes, including any recommendations made by design review panels. So feedback from a design review panel is a material consideration in the planning process. But it's important that design review panels operate consistently across the country and to a high standard. And so with that in mind, the Design Council, CABE, the Landscape Institute, the RTPI and the RIBA got together, and in 2013, they produced this document, which is Design Review Principles and Practice. And that set out the way that they saw kind of a best practice guide to how the design review process should be run and managed. And that's very much how the design review panel that I run operates. We use this as our principal kind of guiding framework and follow its advice closely. So the origins of the design review panel is that we started originally in Plymouth, actually, for Plymouth City Council at the end of 2013, upon request from Paul Barnard there. And very quickly, other local authorities in the Southwest heard what we were doing and liked the way in which we were operating. And I think there was a desire, there were already kind of regional panels, and there was the CABE national panel, but there was a desire to have another alternative provider such that, that we could cope with the capacity, that we could respond quite quickly, and that I think to really make it a little bit more cost effective than maybe it was at the time. So very quickly then we started working with Taunton Deane and West Somerset councils, as they were at the time, and then Exeter Council, and then it grew from there. And very quickly, 16 other local authorities in the Southwest that year then approached me and said, well, would we do it for them on the same basis? So originally, the design review panel was run obviously in person. We had regular meeting dates at Plymouth City Council, Exeter City Council, Taunton Borough Council, in Bath, and at Swindon Council as well. And we would meet kind of, every two weeks there was a meeting date which someone could book in a session for, be it a local authority or an applicant. We originally, when we first started, we held a number of launch events back in 2013, and they were really well attended. And we had councillors, officers, as well as local practitioners and local people who attended to find out. And it was, as I say, well received, and that was encouraged us to carry on. And we held others in Taunton and Plymouth. And then we also held an event in Swindon as well. And then going forward beyond that, I suppose in 2018, we, by word of mouth, people who presented to us in the Southwest said, well, would we also come and look at something further afield? And very organically, without any kind of plan, we said, well, yes, of course. And so it kind of grew. And then we started reviewing things all over the country. And now today we review lots of stuff, and it's as much national as it is Southwest now. And we review things as far up as kind of Eden and the Lake District, and over into Kent and everything in between across to Cornwall as well, which is great. So you can see here there's some pictures I've shared with lots of people stood in various fields, sometimes rainy, sometimes sunny, in different parts of the country, at different sessions that we've held. And we look at we're talking a minute about it, but a range of project types and scales, which is really interesting. Of course, now we're in the world of COVID, so we can't meet. So all sessions now are currently being carried out online. We use Zoom. It lends itself really well to the process. And I don't believe anything's lost by carrying them out online, actually. And in some respects, the silver lining is it's made us all, I think, work, find more innovative ways of working. And it massively, it's more sustainable, I suppose, rather than flying 6 people up to York, for example, to look at a scheme. Of course, we can do that now online, which is great. Of course, site visits are the difficult thing, but we've actually started carrying out site visits using 360-degree virtual photographic site tours. And this is something that if somebody wants one of these, we organise and prepare this as part of the costs of a session. And I've got a short little video here just to show you how it works. So we would pre-agree a route with you. You can see the inset map in the top left-hand corner with the key points. So that's the pre-agreed route. And you can jump to any one of those points, and at those points, of course, pan around 360 degrees, up and down, and you can zoom in as well. And they're very, very effective. So these can get used as part of that Zoom session. At the beginning of the Zoom session, the design team can share their screen and walk the panel and officers through the proposals. And of course, we can go inside and outside of buildings as well. And the benefits of these, of course, they're very interactive. Panel members can ask and revisit certain points. They can go off-road. So, for example, here now, we're looking at a public footpath, but of course, there's no Google Street View in that location. And this is, of course, up to date, bespoke, and carried out at eye level as well. So they're very, very effective. If I can stop that video, fast forward. There we go. Other things that the panel does, we've been doing, is organising annual CPDE training days. We've done 3 of these so far. They've been really well attended. We've had sort of between 100 and 150 people at each session with a variety of speakers. Our first one was Exeter in 2017. Then we did one in Taunton in 2018, and then Salisbury in 2019. Of course, again, sadly, COVID and the current lockdowns stopped us being able to carry one out in 2020. But we are planning, hopefully, touch wood, to carry one out at the end of this year if we can. But past speakers and topics included, they've all kind of been theme-led. So the very first event was we had Andy Robbins, who was the service lead of city development at Exeter, and he talked about the need for an independent design review panel. We had Elaine Oldfoot, who was the design manager at Redrow Homes and is now head of housing delivery at Bristol City Council. And she talked about design review from a housing developer's perspective and how useful it actually was. We had John Tricker, who is South West Director at Phil Jones Associates and a highway engineer, and he spoke about movement, streets and placemaking. We had Tim Burton, who was the Assistant Director of Planning and Environment at Taunton Deane and West Somerset Council, and he talked about, at the time, Taunton was newly appointed to Garden Town, and so he talked about the Garden Town aspirations for Taunton and raising the bar in terms of placemaking there. We've also had Jenny Clifford, who's head of planning and economy at Mid Devon, and she talked about the importance of good design in the planning process, and she spoke alongside Paul Brockway from HIAS, and then that also we held a workshop session later, which looked at their work creating their design codes. And it was a really useful exercise. We had officers there as well as members and design professionals as well. And we looked at that kind of plan making process, but the design guide making process, should I say, but also then how the design review panel can help as part of that process, but also be used after those design guides are in place help as an independent body to assess proposals against those guides, which is very useful. And then we also had Richard Hawkes, who was an architect who spoke about parasymmetric houses, and Dr. Matt Cowley, who was an ecologist who spoke about ecology and planning, which in 2019 was very pertinent. Yeah, no, that was very useful. Like I say, we intend to keep carrying those out. I think it's important that a design review panel, that we share the learning, the process that we go through. We see a lot of projects and there's a lot of collaboration that can take place as a result. We do have some of those CPD films available to watch if anyone's interested on our website. See full versions of them. They were all recorded at the time. So what are the objectives of the design review panel? Well, the main objective is to provide an independent, impartial evaluation process where a multidisciplinary team, and that's really important, which we'll talk a bit more about in a moment, of built environment experts assesses the design of significant proposals. And the important thing there to note is that we're not talking about necessarily just large proposals. We look at a really wide range of projects. So some small proposals are equally significant, and we also look at those. And therefore it's important that the design review panel process, that there's an option for all of those project scales and that it remains accessible and therefore cost effective as well. So the benefits of the panel. The panels here exist to be constructive, and we don't seek to fundamentally redesign things. It's not useful for anybody to take the scheme to a panel and be told that you shouldn't have started from there, because you can present a scheme perhaps to a dozen different architects and get a dozen different responses, all of which might be appropriate. So we don't try to inflict our own taste on a proposal. And we try to be helpful and give constructive guidance to how to improve the scheme rather than where to start again. And again, talking about taste, I mean, we feel as a panel there is such, it's not about one particular style. We aren't sort of pro-modernist or pro-conservation stuff, or it's about the process. And we certainly feel that there is such a thing as good design and bad design that can be demonstrated through process rather than just a matter of taste. So we also think we're here to advise and empower the decision makers. We've got no ambitions of making decisions or trying to be a kind of pseudo decision-making body at all. We're here just to give an independent, impartial advice on design, and that design can cover a wide range of aspects, including ecology, landscape, highways, as well as architecture and urban design. But our remit is limited to that. When we don't get involved in policy discussions. And we stick to talking about design issues. So we can help decision makers resist poorly designed schemes, which of course is good, but we can also help decision makers approve well-designed schemes, in particular sometimes schemes that might not particularly accord with a policy and they might not fit somewhere very comfortably, but where it can be demonstrated that they are particularly high standard of design. There are some case studies we'll look at a little bit later in the presentation, which will demonstrate that that's been a material consideration that's helped them to come forward and be approved. So further benefits of the design review panel. Well, it's useful to applicants as well as the local authorities. It's very useful to applicants because, and the design teams, you're getting sort of kind of peer review from fellow professionals who are also working in industry, have sat both sides of the table, and that can be extremely useful. But they'll be able to freely give you advice, not being sort of constrained by perhaps some of the commercial considerations, although of course we're mindful of them, and that's important. As I've said before, the panel can actually help to support unconventional, high-quality design proposals, which is useful. We can have kind of strategic overview on a project, and provide an external fresh viewpoint, which can be very useful. I think the process does help to sort of reduce the risk of an unexpected decision. That the best way the panel is used is sort of being engaged with very early on, in conjunction alongside pre-apps, in conjunction with the local authority, and then by the time get to a planning application stage, you would hope that you've got support from a independent design review panel, and the local authority officer as well is then able to rely on that. and use that, and there shouldn't be any kind of subjective shocks at the end based upon design or taste. All of which, of course, can also help to speed up the process and provide a more efficient service to clients. So frequently asked questions that we're asking is, well, what is design review? And we've kind of already gone through it, but to summarise, it's important, it's independent, it's multidisciplinary, it's expert, it's impartial, and it's constructive. When's it best undertaken? As I've said before, as early as possible in the design stage. Certainly, it's very rarely helpful to look at a proposal once it's already been submitted for planning. That does happen, but we encourage you not to bring schemes to the panel, to any design review panel that are already in for planning, as there's often very little scope for changes or amendments. Why is it valuable? Again, we've touched on that. It's a material consideration, but apart from that, it of course can help to improve the design proposals for everybody's benefit. And who carries it out? Well, it's carried out with our panel by a multidisciplinary group of built environment professionals. And as I said before, the important thing there is that it's multidisciplinary. We've got a very large pool currently of 106 panel members and growing from across England. And as you can see from this slide, they include civil engineers, landscape architects, urban designers, surveyors, ecologists, high-res engineers, sustainability experts, and so on, even marine biologists, which is really useful because what that means is that we can call upon the right expertise for any given project. We've got a large enough panel that's geographically spread out enough to make sure that we can avoid any conflicts of interest, any kind of local politics or NIMBYism. And so it can be demonstrably independent, which of course is essential. So then types of projects that we've reviewed, we look at a really wide range of proposals, everything you can think of, commercial, residential, urban realm stuff, residential kind of bespoke one-off housing, as well as urban extensions, conservation projects, and so on, hotel, leisure. But I'm going to show you today a few examples of some of the schemes that we've looked at and have been through the process. We can talk a little bit about those and maybe have some questions that relate to them as well. So the first project that I've chosen to show you is East Park at the University of Exeter. This was an 1,182 bedroom student accommodation scheme. And why this was interesting was that this had been, so this formed part of a wider master plan for the university that the panel also had been involved in reviewing. And this scheme came to us at both outline stage and at the reserved matters stage. That gave us the chance to, or gave the university the benefit of kind of consistency of independent overview and suggestion. And in particular, that was useful where there was a different design theme for the outline stage and the reserved matters stage. So originally it was reviewed in 2016 as an outline, and then the reserved matters in 2018. It's currently being, has been approved and is currently on site. So the issues, the things that came up on this initially at the outline stage were to do with sort of wider connectivity to the rest of the master plan and longer range views back towards the site from the wider city, as well as some issues around landscape and access for the students in the end in terms of being able to access open landscape and amenity. And those things were picked up in the reserved matters, and then we were able to comment again. I think because we'd looked at this at the outline stage and had that consistency, actually when the reserved matters scheme came in front of the panel, it was actually really very good. And there was very little that the panel felt it had to comment on to improve. And there were just some minor comments, really sort of reinforce some of those issues around ecology and the external spaces and some accessibility issues as well, which were easily resolved. And as I say, that was approved and is currently on site. And there's a picture I borrowed of it currently being built on site at the moment. So it's a very large scheme for where it is, but actually fits very well within its context and has very little impact, if any, upon neighbouring residential buildings, and there's a real benefit to the university and the city. So that's a great scheme. The next project is of a very different scale, and this is a paragraph 79E house in the countryside by Hawks Architecture and Squires Young Landscape Architecture. This one was approved fairly recently, October 2020, by Tunbridge Wells Council at committee, who voted unanimously to support it, and it's the first scheme, that Paragraph 79 scheme, they've approved in the AONB. It's a 16-acre plot. It's very landscape driven. We carried out a site visit as part of the review for this scheme. Then there was a review, and then there was a couple of follow-up desktop reviews as well. So it really did engage thoroughly in the process, and there was a huge amount of work and evidence base that went into this scheme. And the house explored the character of the old Kent tiled roofs and sort of draped this cloak in a modern contemporary way, then draped that cloak under the building below. But the most exciting part for me of this scheme was actually the landscape and ecology enhancements that were made. And it kind of extended this woodland and this habitat linking to an area of ancient woodland that was really a fantastic place. So we felt it met all the tests of Paragraph 79E, and the local authority then gave a lot of weight to our feedback, and yeah, it was approved in 2020. And here's some other pictures. There's more information on it on Hawks Architecture website, which you can see as well if you're interested. And then another scheme, again, jumping around in terms of scale, we've got a much larger scheme again in Taunton, which is the Firepool site. And this first came to us a long time ago in 2014, and we reviewed it quite a few times between 2014 and 2016. So a really significant strategic project for Taunton, and sort of part of their wider vision as well. And we've reviewed as a panel other sites that link to this wider vision. And therefore we were able to provide again a consistency and a good strategic overview, being able to see how this fitted into that wider vision. But the panel was useful here actually in supporting the local authority to resist a scheme that perhaps wasn't the best. So I've got a quote here from Tim Burton, who at the time was head of planning, and he says the original proposals for Firepool were a product of the Town Centre Action Plan, but the council wanted to deliver something very different, and he thought that as head of planning, that he argued that only if a revised proposal was of exceptional quality could the planning balance be such as to outweigh the policy conflict. So Tim was very willing to enable them to divert from kind of that policy, preset policy, or as long as they could deliver something of an outstanding design. And so it came to us to kind of help in determining whether or not it had achieved that, and to be an independent voice. So they gave us significant weight to our feedback. We had lots of very significant concerns about the scheme. We felt it was overly commercially driven, a lot of car parking, and it wasn't meeting that wider strategic aims of Taunton in terms of placemaking and other things. Excuse me. So we helped the council to resist that poor scheme, but which in turn then encouraged the applicants to come back, re-engage with the panel and the local authority, and a scheme that was appropriate then did subsequently come forward and get approved. And the panel still involved now in reviewing various small schemes that relate to that site going forward. I think excitingly, most recently, the Innovation Centre in Taunton has just been approved, I guess. So that's good news. Some other science, I'm mindful of time, forgive me. Cruxton Farm in Poole, Dorset. This was, or is, for 550 to 600 new homes. I gather this is still a live application in at the moment, but a really exciting scheme that we were delighted to be able to help with. We carried out a site visit, which the local authority took part in as well, and then we had a very in-depth session with the local authority and the design team and the applicant, and were able to give some good advice and help, I hope, which looks like it's been kind of taken into account as the proposals come forward. Yeah, a really lovely scheme that we look forward to seeing the decision on. Then we have our house, or the Poole Gateway Building Phase 2 at Bournemouth University. Again, we carried out a site visit for this scheme, and that was really useful to be able to be shown kind of the rest of the campus and explain strategically how this building fitted into the wider vision and aims of the university. And the local authority also took part in this site visit and the review session, which was extremely helpful. And I know this has been approved and is now on site. Yeah, I think our comments on this scheme mainly related to landscape and how the building would knit in with the rest of the campus identity. And I think we were able to provide some good suggestions that seem to have been taken forward on the scheme in that regard, as well as there were some suggestions in terms of the elevation identity of the building and cladding, which have also been taken forward. So yeah, another lovely project to have been involved in. And then we have a project in Exeter, which is a commercial building, really controversial, this one, on a much smaller scale, but due to its location, it's kind of at a point between Topsham and Exeter, where you've got a real change of character with smaller domestic and residential type development with open green spaces in the estuary as it starts to approach, if you will, the gateway to the city. And there was a real kind of tension on which side of that this fell. We carried out a site visit again and had a session with the local authority and the applicant and the design team, and were able to resolve a lot of the issues by talking about them on site, and made lots of suggestions which were taken forward. And this got approved very recently on the 22nd of January 2021, despite lots and lots of objections, including from the local civic society. And I think I saw there was a letter from the secretary on behalf of the Secretary of State of Defence objecting as well. But ultimately, I'm pleased to say that those constructive discussions and the review session with site visit enabled the design team to find a solution that was acceptable. Another one that we've reviewed recently is in Bromley, and this is a 10-storey building, and this had very different issues again, a very urban setting, but it was all around height and kind of the building's relationship with the street scene. And behind it, there's a very busy A road on the way into London. So there were lots of very different issues to talk about here, as well as in terms of materiality and that front elevation that we're looking at there. So that this building, this image is, excuse me, it's a live planning application at the moment, and this image is taken from that live planning application. And this is a very different image to that which was presented to us at the design review panel session. So I'm really pleased to see that most, if not all, of the comments have been taken on board, and a much better scheme is being put forward. So yeah, interesting to see what happens with that one. We have Fort Bothersand in South Hants. This obviously had lots of conservation issues, as well as some issues in terms of more practical issues in terms of structure and deliverability. And the panel, we were able to get the right expertise on the panel, including some engineering advice in terms of to give suggestions for how to resolve some of those issues. This came to us several times, and the local authority and Historic England took part in the sessions as well. And I think that on this one, as much as anything, the use of the panel was such as to help sort of facilitate that constructive discussion between Historic England, the local authority and the applicant, where I think they'd been struggling before they came to us. They really used our process almost as a mediation type sort of service, but it got everybody in the same room talking about the issues with kind of an independent group of people being able to then give an opinion as well, which really helped move things along. And of course, this has been approved as well. And then last but not least, the UK Hydrographic Office. We looked at this as well a couple of times, pre-planning. Lovely project, won lots and lots of awards, including an RIBA award. And yeah, no, real pleasure to look at this one. I think we had very few comments actually in terms of the building design or its performance. As you can imagine, there was quite a bespoke brief, but there was lots of things to talk about in terms of landscape and placemaking in particular. So very quickly, I'm conscious of time, so Philip and Amelia will bear with me, but feedback is a material consideration. So I've got three sort of examples where schemes that have been to the panel have then gone to appeal, and the planning inspector has given significant weight to the feedback of the design review panel. So this was a scheme in East Devon. It's actually at East Devon District Council's own offices, their site, and it was a scheme Pegasus Life by Sarah Wigglesworth Architects for an assisted living community. This came to, we had a site visit and several design view panel sessions, and the design team really engaged really thoroughly with the panel and responded well, not just paying lip service. And we ultimately felt that in terms of design, it was a really great scheme that should be supported. The local authority turned it down, and then it went to appeal, and planning inspector gave a lot of weight to our panel, and he says this includes extensive comments from the design review panel used by the council to provide professional advice on design matters. The proposed development has clearly evolved to take such views into account, and he goes on to specifically state this engagement with the panel as one of his reasons for then overturning the refusal and granting permission. This is another scheme. This was in Guildford for a student accommodation scheme. And the inspector said, although the advice of the design panel conflicts with the policy G56 of Guildford Borough Local Plan, SPD advises that design review panel's recommendations will help to secure higher quality of design in new development, and though their advice carries great authority in considering the character and appearance of this proposal. And then he went on as well to overturn the refusal and grant permission for this scheme. And then finally, looking at a different kind of scale building, this was for a replacement dwelling in the Greenbelt outside of Bath by Designscape Architects. And this again, there was a site visit, and this came to us on a number of occasions. And again, the design team, very thoroughly engaged with the panel, and the local authority took part as well in the sessions. But ultimately, the local authority felt there was a conflict between the proposals and the policy, because this building was on a much larger footprint within the Greenbelt, and they were concerned about the impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. The panel felt that based upon the landscape and ecological proposals presented, that the advantages outweighed that concern, and that actually how we were defining the impact on the openness wasn't just a mathematical calculation, but came down to design and appearance, and we supported it. The planning inspector went to appeal, and the planning inspector says a design review panel has indicated that the building is of higher architectural quality than that which it will replace. I give significant weight to the design review panel support of the scheme, which concludes the proposal would deliver demonstrable enhancements when compared to the existing building, having a reduced impact overall on the landscape. And again, he went on to overturn the refusal and approve the scheme. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. I think I'm doing okay. I think I did okay for time. But if we're going to do some questions now, of course. But if there's any other information that you'd like to see, we do have these guides, which I think have been shared through this group, through this webinar. But they're also on our website, and there's one there aimed at local authorities and one aimed at consultants and developers. So thank you very much. Back over to you, Philip and Amelia.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. I thought it was really interesting. It was really nice to hear your take on how the design review panels have evolved over time and their origins and how operate them today. I found your Fort Bobisand example in South Hams particularly interesting. That's a really cool place to live. That's the sort of place I'd snap up in a second if I had the chance, but it looked great. I don't know if you had any thoughts, Millie.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It was interesting to hear about how you sort of fit in with the planning process and as a material consideration. And I found the Bournemouth University gatehouse gateway building particularly interesting because I've driven past it quite a few times and noticed its prominence. So it was good to hear about how you've had an important part there in that as well. So I think we've had quite a few questions through. I was going to pass over to Philip to ask you some of them, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Should we start off, Jonathan? I've had a fair few. I've had quite a few people asking how they can get involved, actually, and I guess sort of people saying what sort of age range and experience is required and is represented in your design review panels you run. I'm thinking more generally, the design review panels tend to be kind of dominated by more senior people in more respected in their industry. But do you think there is a bit of scope for getting people involved earlier on in their careers and potentially a sort of young planner design review panel?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I think it's important that the panel members, of course, have enough gravitas and experience to be able to comment. But at the same time, so their opinion is respected as well. But at the same time, it's really important that the people on the panel are in industry, practicing, you know, sat both sides of the tables. What we don't want to become is a very kind of academic panel with people who are only retired people, or maybe who are only in academia, because I think it kind of loses touch with you know, what's going on in the current trends, etc., and maybe the latest legislation and thinking as well. So yeah, no, I would really encourage people to get involved at whatever stage of their career. Please don't be shy. Do send through, you know, email me or send through your CV and some information about you. And yeah, no, that'd be wonderful to hear from people.
Good stuff. Another one we've had people saying, do you often find there's a conflict between the advice that you provide and whether the councils agree? For example, if you're looking at a particularly contentious planning application or a pre-app, have you ever come across any really stubborn councils where they've come back and really had a go at the kind of advice that you've given?
Yes. Yeah, no. We've had a couple. I don't think it's ever got kind of heated, but we've been disagreed with, certainly. And I think often that can come about through, more often, less so by officers and more often by members. And I think often that can be linked to local politics. Of course, they're trying to represent the views of their constituents and concerns that they might have. But that's why I would encourage applicants to ask local authorities to engage in the process as well, and not do this outside of that engagement. And I would encourage local authority officers to engage and take part, because then it's a really useful meaning exercise kind of early on in that process. And hopefully then that should never happen, because if officers take part, they're welcome there to speak during the session, and we have a constructive, you know, peer review. We're all professional people working in the industry, and we can talk about all of the issues. So it should never get to that stage, hopefully, if everybody engages early enough.
And on that point, do you find there's often quite an interest from developers to involve the local planning authority in your design review panel, or is there quite often they don't want them involved? What kind of split is there in terms of?
Yeah, mostly they do, I'm pleased to say, want to involve local authorities. We do get some. We've had an instance, I want to say, a very large national house builder bought a site to us probably 18 months ago that they didn't want the local authority involved in, and that wasn't because they were at loggerheads with the local authority. That was simply because it was commercially sensitive. They hadn't yet bought this site. They had an option. I think they were negotiating on buying various pieces of land. So they wanted an independent view as to which bits of land they should be buying. Was it viable? Was it not, before they kind of went ahead? So there was that commercial sensitivity. We, of course, do also get situations where there's been a breakdown in relationship between the design team or the applicant and the local authority. And they sometimes just want, like, can we just get a sanity check, a sense of perspective? And yes, we do provide those as well. And equally, we've had local authorities bring schemes to us where the developers refused to take part, and the local authority said, please, will you give us a sanity check and kind of something that we can hang our hat on that's an independent voice, because we're going to turn this down, or we want them to improve it, but how do we make them talk to us? And so we've been used in both ways, but I'd rather that collaborative, I know it's naive, but I'd rather that early on collaborative engagement works best for everybody.
Yeah, agreed. And we had one question for somebody here saying, can design review panels work without a significant budget? I guess some of the examples you've shown in your presentations there, some of the bigger examples are more generally more interesting in terms of their scale and the architecture. But you know, are there options available? Do you cater for sort of smaller developments? And this person's also asked, how can panels engage with reluctant developers?
Yes, we do look at smaller things as well. We offer a range of different session options because I think that's really key. I mean, that's part of my desire to sort of start and found this panel, and I think part of the reason some of the local authorities asked me to set it up, because I think historically design review's been there, but it's been quite inaccessible just due to the economics of it. It's been very expensive process which made it inaccessible. So we provide kind of a range of sessions from 90-minute sessions on a preset date, remote desktop reviews. They're kind of the two cheapest ways of accessing it. And at the moment, you can have a 90-minute review session on a preset date for a minor project for £1,100, and then that kind of an £1,800 for a major scheme, which is really significantly much cheaper than, say, the National CABE panel, which I think for a major scheme is kind of £8,500 for the similar kind of process. So yeah, we're much more accessible. If somebody has, we've actually carried out a workshop day for somebody as well. They had several schemes. Plymouth City Council got us in to look at 6 schemes in a day, and then by doing that, they could split the cost over 6 different projects, and that reduced the cost right down. I think it probably worked out about £500–600 a session, a project for them. So there are ways to make it more accessible.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, it's certainly in the grand scheme of things, in terms of developers sort of costing out for the project, that's quite reasonable, isn't it? Yeah, so that's good. Got another question here. Somebody's put, with the current consultation on the MPPF, particularly focusing on design, do you think that the government should require all major proposals to be considered by a design review panel in order to assist local planning authorities who do not generally have in-house design experts?
Yes, I do actually. I think it's I understand the other side of the argument. The difficulty is what you designate as significant, and what there's the whole argument around that, whether a project. But yeah, I just maybe all major projects should, as a matter of course, have to come to a level of design review, even if there might be different levels for different projects depending on where they're at and the kind of acceptability to the local authority. But I think that'd be really useful for everybody. And I don't think it represents another barrier or hurdle to development. I think it would do the opposite. I think it would speed up the process, because as the person asking the question says, where local authorities don't have that in-house expertise sometimes, the panel can provide it, which is helping the local authority and helping the officer speed up that process internally for them, which speeds it up then for the applicant. So it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And on that note around sort of consultation on the MPPF, do you have any views on the proposed changes to it to include a reference to building with beauty? And do you think that design review panels have a role in the formation of local planning authority design codes?
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. I'm delighted to see that design is at the heart of kind of that thought process and the changes coming up. I have got concern about the word beauty, because that kind of starts to smack of taste, which varies, and I kind of touched on that in the presentation, that I don't think it's a matter of taste. Good design, I feel I can see something that isn't of my taste, but I can recognize it's good design, and I can see that it's successful in terms of placemaking, but it might not be to my taste. So I think there's a real danger there that it's going to, what we don't want is kind of a lot of poor quality pastiche stuff being thrown up in the name of this is what the community want, when perhaps it isn't. It's how it's assessed, I think. So I think beauty is a dangerous word. I think good design is what it should say. Sorry, what was the second part of the question, Philip?
It was, do you think design review panels should have a role in the formation of any local planning authority design codes for particular developments or areas?
Yes, well, interesting. We at that event that we held in Salisbury that I quickly showed some slides for, we had obviously Jenny Clifford there and Paul from HIAS talking about that process they'd gone through in mid-Devon. And we also had David Hawes, who was one of the urban designers who'd worked with them in preparing that design code, and we carried out a workshop. And I think that was really useful. I think we can act as enablers to help with that. I don't think we should be the ones preparing the design codes, but as an independent organisation that can help assess those design codes and help maybe with the process of their creation and maybe even the consultation, then yeah, absolutely. And I certainly think design review panels should be used. I don't think there are odds. I don't think once you've got a design code, you don't need the design review panel process. I think quite the opposite. I think once you've got a design code, that's great. Now you still need an independent body of professionals to be able to say, well, has it met the design code in a subjective kind of professional way?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's getting that sort of follow-up and consistency through to actually make the design happen in the real world, isn't it? Yeah. Got a slightly different question here. Somebody's put, I work for a water company and we need help in facilitating the widespread adoption of water recycling. And I guess they're trying to think how they could kind of adopt various different methods and sort of into their buildings, but also make it look a bit nicer in the landscape, is I guess the kind of angle they're coming from that. And if it, can design review panels help at all on that? And have you had any expertise in this kind of slightly more industrial project before?
We haven't looked at an awful lot of industrial projects, I have to admit, no. But I certainly see there is a role that we could do. We have obviously the expertise on the panel to look at things like that if that were wanted. So yeah, certainly something we could help with. Not something we've done yet, so really interesting.
So, there's no one here, somebody saying, I guess following through on that sort of design code aspect, someone's put, do you find design SPDs useful, or, and I guess if you don't, what do you think should be the alternative?
I think what we try to, we've obviously got to give our feedback and opinion in the context of any planning policy, that exists, but we try not to get drawn and sucked into any interpretation of any specific policies or guidance, because what we mustn't become is just another kind of subcommittee of a local authority. And I think it's helpful. What we tend to do is look at things more in the round, more early on than that. So no, we tend to sort of steer clear of being drawn into interpretation of policy. Right.
Okay. Good stuff. And so I think final question. Somebody's we've gone back to sort of planning history and town planning kind of theory that we learned at university, but the films. But the Royal Fine Arts Commission and the Council of Industrial Design have been around since World War II. Why did they not anticipate the antisocial aspects of streets in the sky ideas and other poor design elements of the post-war era? That's a slightly challenging one for you, and I'm sure you're not speaking for them, but I'm sure you do ways things.
For them, way before I was born.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's a valid, question that there's I think there's a lot of faults that have been made historically, but it's very easy to sort of look back and not like things and blame people for the past. With hindsight, it's 2020, and based on our current scenario, we wouldn't, in our current context, probably do a lot of things that we've done historically. But what we need to do is move forward and be positive now. And I think this, the way we run design reviews has evolved. Hence, I've started this particular panel to do it in a more kind of multidisciplinary and engaged way, rather than, I think it probably started a little bit elitist. I don't think that's very helpful.
No. No, but yeah, it's interesting. They've got a really good role to play now, and yeah, I think it's trying to big you guys up and get you involved in many more projects. I mean, we've used you many times and we found you really, really good. It's been really useful in terms of getting that impartial advice which you can pass on to the local planning authority where they perhaps don't have that in-house expertise themselves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Millie, shall I hand it for you to close up?
Lovely, thank you everyone for submitting those really interesting questions, and thanks once again Jonathan as well for joining us today. That was really insightful. Next week everyone should be emailed with a copy of the video and the presentation and any further questions that we didn't get around to answering, and just keep an eye out on the RTPI website for any future opportunities. And just to say finally that the feedback section will launch immediately after the session closes, so we'd really appreciate if you could just quickly fill in the questions that come up. But thank you everyone, we hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for attending. Thank you, Jonathan.